One of the most interesting sessions for young developers gathered here at Gamelab 2015 has been the one by Rami Ismail. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, of course, you're currently making Nuclear Throne, and for those who are not following the regular updates that you're sharing with people, can you give us a brief, sum up how the game is going right now and what can we expect?
So Nuclear Throne is a top-down action roguelike. It's a very fast action game that's procedurally generated. Every time you play in a differently generated world. You can choose from 12 mutants in a post-apocalyptic future that all have their own special powers and abilities. It's been in early access for about 2.5 years now on PC, Mac and Linux on Steam. And you can also buy it through Humble and Twitch. We do live streams every week, Tuesday and Thursday, and we release updates every Saturday. I have to upload a new build tomorrow, actually, and we're at update 78 right now. And the game has grown a lot over the last 2.5 years. It's been a really fun project. It's been a really rough project because updating a game every week turns out to be a lot of work. But it's come together really well. The community has been absolutely amazing and very inspiring for us. It's just having that constant feedback from everybody while making a game is something that we've never done before. Normally you work in isolation for so long and then you hope that it's going to be good. And this time we're making a game and we know it's good because the community has, the community of thousands, tens of thousands of players has told us that it's good. So it's a really exciting way of making a video game. Yeah, it's fun.
You've just said that minor things on games can have a huge impact. Which are the minor things of Nuclear Throne for you?
So the minor things in Nuclear Throne were obviously the rise of early access and the rise of live streaming. And then on top of that, I think for us, the biggest thing is we worked on a lot of games that have different little elements in them that we think are really interesting. Super Crate Box was a lot about randomness, about adapting to situations that are unpredictable. Luftrausers was very much about building your own avatar and figuring out what kind of build or strategy you wanted to use. Ridiculous Fishing was about creating a really tight feedback loop. We pulled all of those things together into one game. So for us, it's kind of like the end result of everything we've ever made is Nuclear Throne. It's everything combined. All the best part of all our games is Nuclear Throne. So it's a lot of very tiny things. It's like getting a random weapon in Super Crate Box is also you don't know what you're going to get in Nuclear Throne. All of those little feelings and thoughts were what ended up in Nuclear Throne. And then the live streaming and the early access just kind of completed the whole image and turned it into Nuclear Throne as we know it now.
You mentioned several mechanics and titles, but for me, if I think of Vlambeer, is I get action-packed, colorful, retro-style game. Is that something you want to keep, this kind of image, or you try maybe new art styles, new genres, or from now on?
I mean, our goal with Vlambeer has always kind of been we really like arcade games, and we kind of feel that for how much people say that arcade is dead, we wanted to prove that it's not. It's very much alive. It's just not a lot of people are working in that genre, and a lot of our style is actually dictated by the gameplay. Our artist Paul Veer, he's really good at creating game art that is really good for the specific game design, and in our cases, a lot of our games are about precision. And the best way to communicate precision is pixels because they're very binary. It's it's pixel perfect. So for us, the style that we have is more a result of the games that we're making. If we decide to make a slightly different game, it will probably have a slightly different look to it as well. It all helps the gameplay in the end.
Your speech was called Wrong, capital letters Wrong. What have you shared with the audience mainly?
So the thing that I tried to explain to everybody here was that everybody makes mistakes in their career as a creative, as a game designer, and that is not something to be embarrassed of or ashamed of. It's a natural result of being in an industry where so much is uncertain, and every part of the industry is continuously making mistakes and then trying to correct for them, and then making mistakes and trying to correct for them, and it kind of goes on. And I think a lot of people are worried about making mistakes or being seen as somebody who has failed, and I just wanted to share all sorts of stories about failure, about mistakes, all sorts of ways that the industry is not optimal, just to show people that that's not a bad thing, and we can just talk about that, and it would actually be really healthy to talk about that and to not try to avoid making mistakes or to hide that you're making mistakes, instead to share so that we can all learn from it, and that's kind of what the talk was about.
In case that sounds too negative, I mean, you've listed like 4 bad choices. Can you list now like 4 really, really good choices?
4 really good choices that the industry had. Well, I mean, I think a lot of things in the industry just kind of loop back to being really good choices. Like a lot of mistakes end up having very positive effects. A lot of them are very hard to even like describe as like purely wrong. It's just that when you look at them from a certain perspective, they're wrong. So I talked about the rise of indie games and about how more democratized tools are great, but that also that leads to discoverability problems because now there are more games, so it's harder to get attention for any single one game. Now, obviously, that's a problem in our industry, but it's a problem that was caused by something that was good. And I think pretty much every mistake kind of has a flip side to it, something that is positive about it. Even the worst things in the industry, like recent controversies in the industry, like they still raise the topic in a way that allows us to talk about things, and it just seems that mistakes always have something that comes out of it that is positive, and I think any single thing that I mentioned in my talk is also a positive in some way.
Now that you mentioned attention, you also mentioned that the advertisement costs for your games, of course, rised. But the price of the games is pretty much the same when we're talking about low price. How are you tackling this in Vlambeer?
So we've actually been worried about pricing in video games for a long time. I think as an industry we're really bad at explaining why our products cost a certain amount of money, and we're very stuck in current pricing models. So a game like Destiny that has a full budget of like $500 million and has cost like $140 million up to this point to create is being sold at this point for like $30 in stores. Mm-hmm. I get that because you want to sell copies, but it launched at like $69 or something, and it could have easily been a bit more than that. It's just that we can't do that. Like we've never explained to the consumers and audiences why the price of games can't stay low, or shouldn't stay low, because it just makes for safer choices, and that makes for more boring games. And I think that's like a lot, like this is an example of like little things that turn into big things. Like because the price goes down, publishers make safer choices, so games become more alike. And because games become more alike, there's more space for indie games to sort of like grow in that space. But also AAA becomes more and more risky because as games become more alike, there's less reason to buy extra games. So they actually end up shooting themselves in the foot. And I think they're 100% aware of that. But there's just no way around it because we've got no way to go around that. So AAA Studios started introducing DLC and pre-order bonuses and merchandise, stuff like that, to try and like still make some extra money on a game. But it is kind of a broken model, and I'm very worried about where that's going. So for Nuclear Throne, for example, and also for Ridiculous Fishing, we've never done a sale. We're just not part of sales. We've never been part of sales. For Ridiculous Fishing, it's one of the only iOS games that has never been in a sale ever. That did really well. And for Nuclear Throne, it's the same thing. Up till this point, 2.5 years into development, Nuclear Throne has never been a single dollar cheaper than the $13 that we're asking for it, and we think $13 is a very fair price. Mm-hmm. So,
a few years ago, you explained that you wanted to have like a pipeline and produce every single game for several platforms, but now, like a couple of weeks ago, you announced that you got Nintendo in. For this agreement for giving your games to Nintendo platforms. How it took that long, and how are you feeling now that you get another couple of platforms to serve your games on?
So a licensing deal doesn't mean that our games are launching. It means that our games can launch on those platforms. We still have to evaluate whether it's a feasible thing to launch on Nintendo platforms, especially for a game like Nuclear Throne. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's weird. One of the first goals we had with Vlambeer was to be able to launch on any platform, and now we can. So now we kind of have to think about, okay, what's next? What are we gonna do? Like we've achieved this goal, this like the big one. Now what? So yeah, it's time to find a new goal. It's time to like start arguing about it. And since I made this deal on my current trip, when I get back home, I'll sit down with JW, with my colleague, and like figure out what's next for Vlambeer. It's actually kind of exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Closing one, of course, you're always interested in indie games, apart from your own games. Always interested in the indie scene.
Yeah.
Is there anything you've found here in Spain or in the indie hub that really got your attention?
Oh yeah, there's actually a lot of. I've been very impressed this year. I mean, last year was already really, really good, but this year it really seems like the games have stepped up. There's The Guest, which I think is really, really exciting. It's a beautiful project. There is Calendula, which is a really weird kind of psychological. It's very, very odd, but it's really, really good. I was very surprised. I actually like seriously freaked out playing that game a little bit. It's really good, but like overall, just the games that are here are of an amazing quality, and they all like. What is interesting to me is that it's a very diverse group of games. So some games are like very clearly meant for commercial purposes, but other games are more like little experiments that just kind of got out of hand, and they all seem to succeed so well at the thing they're doing, which for me is a sign of a very mature group of developers that have really figured out like this is the thing I want to do and this is how I'm going to do it, and that's exciting because that gives me a lot of hope for the next few years of development here in Spain.
Sounds right. Thank you for your time, Rami.
Thanks for having me.